Alright, YouTube, it's time for Occult Literature video number 107, The Useful Family Herbal, also known as Dr. John Williams' Last Legacy. Rather interesting work. It fits in with the time period. We're talking early 19th century, the 1820s, so it's got some medical advice in there that I don't think you should really follow, but it's interesting. I'll take you through some of the constant inclusions in the recipes there. As always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, a second link to my books blog. If you're interested in the herbal sort of folk remedy side, I've got a bunch of other works on that topic. I'm currently editing others, the Canadian herbal and so forth. Gunpowder is a war remedy, which I also scanned for the archive. Interesting stuff. Herbal medicine and things like that are one of the main interests that I have in the historical side of the occult. I will be, by the way, quick aside, and I'll do a general update about this in the near future, I will be re-editing Fruits of Eden for a second edition in accordance with a rather massive number of new species and sort of historical context from all of these herbals I've been researching and editing. It'll be longer. It'll be in an even better format. Some people complained about the setting of the pictures, actually, in the first edition. So I'll be taking care of that. I think people will appreciate what I'm going to do with it. This particular work is rather short. It's only 30 pages, but it is extremely compact. That is, it's nearly 100 medicinal remedies for various things. And it's sort of a short counterpart to the Canadian herbal, only instead of a more expansive list of species, it renders it to a short index. It's only a couple pages long towards the end. And it makes them more compact. Now, more than half of all the medical recipes, the receipts, they were called at the time, within this work include alcohol. So I can imagine people suffering from any of these various complaints, while they may not have been objectively cured by any of these remedies, they certainly would have forgotten about their pain because you're mixing often narcotic substances, something like mandrake, in with alcohol. Wine and rum are both mentioned frequently, and in a couple of cases you're actually making a kind of herbal beer in your still. Now, there are a few things in here, though, that are... Well, first there are a few things that are dangerous, like using lead sugar or something like that, or quicksilver. I don't think you should use that as a remedy. But then there are some things in here that actually make sense. They actually do contain potentially medicinal compounds. Chamomile, for instance, for certain complaints. Chamomile is recognized as a sedative, as a relaxant. It mentions elecampane, comfrey, and so forth. But it also mentions, and this is interesting, the use of pine boughs actually in the brewing process. Now, back then, before hops were actually used in alcohol to any great extent, usually spruce needles or pine boughs, things like that, were actually added to it. Early alcohols, early beers from the medieval period up through, they weren't really beers. Now they tend to make many people sleepy because they contain hops. Back then they were stimulating. They actually increased a person's energy. It was sort of the crude forerunner to like these caffeine-infused so-called beers that we have now, that people drink all the time, you know, like college kids and stuff. So they get hammered, but they've also got a massive amount of caffeine in their system. It's sort of the rough early counterpart to that. As a flavoring agent, hops are mentioned here several times, including in one instance outside of the brewing process altogether. Whereas pine and spruce, some of this material is actually used instead within brewing. It's one of these periods of time where you're sort of in between the two periods of brewing. I thought that was interesting, just as a historical aside. Yes, pine and so forth were used first. Hops come later. That being said, this is almost as well in the form of a grimoire. Because of the period of time in which it's being written, the 1820s. Medicine, as we now know it, didn't exist. We're still talking about the use of the humors, bleeding, and so forth. Purging, out of either end, either a puke, which is literally listed. They say, oh, take a puke for this malady or something like that. Or, anally, a person causing themselves to purge through the other end to rid their body of some toxin or something that they might have imagined was causing disease. It's a very, very interesting period work. Historically speaking, you know, talking 200 years ago, in the wake of the Enlightenment, we're talking pre-industrial era. People are still largely living in these small village communities, doing survivalistic hunting and farming and so forth. Nutritional deficiencies were quite common at the time. Many of the treatments here, actually, insofar as they restored nutritional deficiencies, could have worked. For instance, tuberculosis is common in the modern world, in both advanced and non-advanced nations now at this point. But most people never show any symptoms if they have a nutrition-filled diet, because the disease is actually suppressed. So trying to bulk up on, I believe it's specifically a sort of malt and barley-filled drink, yeah, it could, as long as they had proper nutrition in the form of, yes, they're getting vitamins and minerals. Potentially it could have prevented tuberculosis from happening. That is definitely a possibility. So some of these are a little bit spurious in the sense that, well, it's basically witch doctor stuff. But other treatments that are listed here, they could have had some benefit, honestly. You know, they didn't have modern medicine, they had herbal medicine and the theory of the humors. Insofar as they restored the proper balance of the body in a vitamin-related sense, yeah, some of these could have worked at least to some extent. And you would have been so drunk you probably wouldn't have cared. So I suppose if your condition was mental or temporary anyway, hey, it gave you some relief, I suppose. Interesting herbal work. Again, it has a running index, 2-page index of certain species of note that are mentioned within the actual context of the manuscript at large. As before, link in the description to my edition of this work, very worthy work, on Amazon. Second link to my books blog, where you can find other materials of a similar nature, or you can go for spell books, historical pieces, whatever it happens to be. That's about all. Peace out.